Trade wars. The phrase alone is enough to make anyone picture a bunch of guys in powdered wigs chucking tea into Boston Harbor. But here's the thing. Trade wars aren't some antiquated historical footnote. They're happening right now, and frankly, it's a bit of a shit show. Today, we're breaking down the top 10 pros and cons of this ongoing economic slap fight between the US and China. Because let's be honest, trying to understand global economics can sometimes feel like you're trying to decipher the Voynich manuscript after a bottle of tequila. We'll be diving deep into the impacts, both good and bad, of this economic tit-for-tat. We're talking about the potential benefits for some industries, the unavoidable gut punch to others, and the ripple effects that could leave the entire global economy feeling a bit seasick. Because, and here's the kicker, whether you're a farmer in Iowa, a tech worker in California, or just someone who enjoys the occasional cheap plastic doodad, this trade war will probably find a way to affect you. So, buckle up, because we're about to unpack more economic jargon than a Wall Street board meeting. Alright, let's start with a potential upside, because even a dumpster fire can have a heartwarming backstory, right? One argument in favor of this trade war is that slapping tariffs on Chinese goods could be a shot in the arm for domestic industries. Think of it like this. You walk into a store, you see two nearly identical products. One's made in China, the other's made right here in the good old US of A. The Chinese one's cheaper, obviously, because even their sweatshops have sweatshops. But thanks to those tariffs, the American-made product is suddenly a bit more competitive. Now, the hope is that you, the patriotic consumer, will choose to buy American, supporting local businesses and boosting the national economy. It's the kind of heartwarming economic patriotism that gets politicians all misty-eyed. But, and this is a big but like a really enormous economy size but, it all hinges on whether people are willing to open their wallets a little wider for that Made in America sticker. And let's be honest, folks. We live in a world where people will spend 20 minutes scouring the internet for a coupon code to save $3 on a pair of socks. Are those same people really going to shell out significantly more for American-made goods? The jury's still out on that one, but hey, let's be optimistic for a moment and say it works. Domestic industries get a much-needed boost, factories start humming again, and bald eagles, overcome with emotion, spontaneously start handing out tax returns. It's a beautiful image, isn't it? But, like most beautiful things in life, it's probably a lie. Remember that whole Buy American thing we just talked about? Well, get ready for a plot twist because those tariffs, they're not just going to magically disappear into thin air. No, those tariffs get passed down the line faster than a family heirloom at a redneck wedding. And guess who ends up footing the bill? That's right, you, the ever-so-patriotic consumer. Suddenly those everyday essentials you rely on, like those socks you just saved $3 on, well, they just got a whole lot more expensive. We're talking electronics, clothing, even groceries. Remember that heartwarming image of bald eagles handing out tax returns? Yeah, well, now they're swooping down and snatching your hard-earned cash to pay for those inflated prices. And look, I'm as much of a fan of economic warfare as the next guy who enjoys watching the world burn, but even I have to admit, making everyday goods more expensive for hard-working Americans just feels, well, it feels a bit like shooting ourselves in the foot. It's like trying to put out a fire by pouring gasoline on it. Sure, it might make for a more exciting blaze, but it's not exactly a long-term solution. So, while those tariffs might sound good in theory, in practice, they can leave consumers feeling like they just got mugged by their own government. And trust me, no one wants to be the political party in power when the American people realize they're paying extra for everything from iPhones to toilet paper. Okay, so we've established that tariffs can be a bit of a double-edged sword, but they do have another use, one that's less about economic growth and more about good old-fashioned international power plays. See, governments love to use tariffs as leverage in negotiations. It's like a high-stakes game of economic chicken, with each country threatening to impose more and more tariffs until the other backs down. Think of it like this. You're at a flea market, haggling over a slightly cursed antique spoon that you're convinced will bring you untold wealth. You and the seller are locked in a battle of wills, each trying to outmaneuver the other. In this scenario, tariffs are like saying, look, I'll give you $20 for this spoon, but if you don't accept, I'm going to go to the food court and buy a churro the size of your head, and then we'll see who's laughing. It's a risky strategy, but when it works, it can result in some pretty sweet deals. Countries can use tariffs to pressure trading partners into lowering their own trade barriers, opening up their markets, or even changing their domestic policies, and you knew there was going to be a but, didn't you? This kind of economic brinksmanship can also backfire spectacularly. If neither side is willing to back down, we end up in a full-blown trade war, with tariffs flying faster than insults at a Trump family reunion. And that, my friends, is rarely a good thing for anyone involved. Unless, of course, you're in the business of selling antacids, in which case, congratulations, you're about to make a killing. Remember that cheap plastic doodad I mentioned earlier? The one that's about to get a whole lot more expensive thanks to these tariffs? Well, that little trinket has a surprisingly complex backstory. See, it didn't magically appear on a store shelf after a stork dropped it off. No, that doodad is the product of a vast and intricate network of suppliers, manufacturers, and distributors spanning the globe. It's a delicate ecosystem, held together by the glue of efficiency and the promise of cheap labor. But when you introduce tariffs into the mix, well, it's like lobbing a grenade into a library. Suddenly those carefully calibrated supply chains are thrown into chaos. Companies are forced to scramble, desperately trying to find new suppliers, renegotiate contracts, and reroute shipments. It's like trying to play Jenga with a tower made of live badgers. One wrong move and the whole thing comes crashing down. And guess who gets to clean up the mess? That's right, it's the businesses, consumers, and innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. We're talking delays, shortages, and price hikes that would make even the most seasoned economist weep into their spreadsheets. So the next time you're tempted to think of trade wars as a simple spat between countries, remember that cheap plastic doodad. Because its journey from a factory floor in China to your junk drawer is a testament to the interconnectedness of our globalized world. And disrupting that interconnectedness, even in the name of economic patriotism, can have some pretty messy consequences. Alright, let's move on to an issue that's near and dear to the heart of any nation that's ever had its lunch money stolen on the playground of global commerce intellectual property theft. See, China has a bit of a reputation for playing fast and loose with other countries' patents, trademarks, and copyrights. They've been known to borrow designs, reverse engineer products, and generally treat intellectual property laws like suggestions rather than hard and fast rules. It's enough to make even the most zen patent lawyer start seeing red, and that, my friends, is where the trade war comes in handy. See, one of the arguments in favor of these tariffs is that they can be used as a stick to beat China into submission on intellectual property rights. The idea is that by threatening to slap tariffs on Chinese goods, the US can force China to crack down on intellectual property theft within its borders. It's like trying to get a toddler to stop biting by threatening to take away their favorite stuffed animal. Will it work? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? China has made some concessions on intellectual property in recent years, but whether those changes are enough to satisfy the US remains to be seen. It's a delicate balancing act, and one that could have major implications for the future of innovation and technological development. Because let's face it, no one wants to invest in developing cutting-edge technology if some other country is just going to rip it off and sell it for cheaper. That's like writing a best-selling novel only to have someone steal it, change the character names to those of obscure vegetables, and then sell it as their own work of genius. It's not right, it's not fair, and it certainly doesn't bode well for the future of creativity. Here's a newsflash: trade wars, they tend to involve a lot of, well, trading of wars. It's a bit like that moment in a playground argument when someone yells, "Oh yeah? Well, my dad can beat up your dad." Except instead of dads, it's entire economies, and instead of fists, it's retaliatory tariffs. See, when one country imposes tariffs, the other country doesn't usually just sit back and say, "Oh, well played, old chap." No, they hit back with tariffs of their own, targeting industries that are politically sensitive or economically important to the other side. It's a vicious cycle of economic escalation, and it can quickly spiral out of control. Imagine a tennis match where instead of hitting a ball back and forth, the players are launching increasingly larger and more dangerous animals over the net. It starts with a few harmless squirrels, then escalates to raccoons, then badgers, then suddenly you've got a full-blown hippopotamus situation on your hands. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and frankly, it's a terrible way to run a global economy. These retaliatory tariffs hurt businesses, disrupt supply chains, and drive up prices for consumers. It's like trying to win a food fight by throwing your own lunch at the wall. Sure, you might make a mess, but you're also going to be hungry afterwards. And in the case of a trade war, that hunger can be felt far beyond the borders of the countries involved. Okay, let's talk about jobs, because what's a good economic policy debate without a healthy dose of job-related anxiety? One of the arguments often touted in favor of trade wars is that they can create jobs, and in some sectors, that might actually be true. When you slap tariffs on imported goods, it can make domestic products more competitive, potentially leading to increased demand and, you guessed it, more jobs. It's like building a giant wall around your country, and then telling everyone inside, "Congratulations, you're all hired to make things for each other now." But here's the catch. Those job gains in certain sectors are often offset by job losses in others. See, those retaliatory tariffs we talked about? They don't just magically disappear into the ether. They hit industries that rely on exports, and they hit them hard. Suddenly, businesses that once thrived by selling their goods overseas are facing higher costs, reduced demand, and the very real possibility of having to lay off workers. It's like trying to balance a seesaw on the back of a runaway camel. Sure, you might be able to keep it level for a little while, but eventually, something's gotta give. So, while some industries might experience a surge in hiring, others are left to deal with the economic fallout. And that, my friends, is why trade wars are often described as a zero-sum game. For every winner, there's a loser, and the overall impact on employment can be negligible at best and, honestly, downright disastrous at worst. Okay, let's talk about those industries that rely on exports, because they're the ones who are really feeling the heat from this trade war. See, when you slap tariffs on goods from another country, it's not just their businesses that feel the pain, it's also the businesses in your own country that depend on those imports or that export their own goods to that country. It's like playing a game of economic Jenga where the blocks are made of jobs, and the person pulling them out is, well, us. You might think you're being strategic, targeting specific industries, but the reality is that everything in the global economy is interconnected. You pull out one block and the whole thing could come crashing down. Imagine a farmer in Iowa who relies on exporting soybeans to China. Suddenly, those soybeans are subject to hefty tariffs, making them more expensive for Chinese buyers. Demand plummets, prices drop, and that farmer is left with a surplus of soybeans and a whole lot of debt. That's not just bad news for the farmer, it's bad news for the entire agricultural industry, and it ripples outwards from there, affecting everything from transportation to manufacturing. It's a chain reaction of economic pain, and it's a stark reminder that in a trade war, there are rarely any real winners. Alright, let's talk about national security, because when it comes to justifying questionable economic policies, nothing quite gets the blood pumping like the threat of a foreign power doing something vaguely menacing. See, one of the arguments used to justify trade restrictions, particularly those targeting China, is that they're necessary to protect national security. And to be fair, there are some legitimate concerns about China's technological ambitions, and their willingness to use economic leverage for geopolitical gain. No one wants to wake up one morning and find out that their country's entire 5G network is powered by a Chinese company with suspiciously close ties to the Communist Party. But the problem is that national security can be a bit of a catch-all term, used to justify all sorts of protectionist measures that have little to do with actual national security, and more to do with protecting domestic industries from competition. It's like that friend who cancels plans at the last minute, citing a family emergency, when you know they're just at home binge-watching reality TV. Sure, there might be a genuine emergency occasionally, but after a while you start to get suspicious. The line between legitimate national security concerns and economic protectionism can be blurry, and it's important to be wary of any government that's too quick to invoke national security as a justification for policies that harm consumers and stifle competition. Here's a fun fact. When two of the world's largest economies engage in a protracted trade war, it tends to have a bit of a ripple effect. And by ripple effect, I mean a massive economic tsunami that can swamp even the most seaworthy of global markets. See, the global economy is a bit like a giant game of Jenga played by people who are heavily intoxicated and also juggling chainsaws. It's chaotic, it's unpredictable, and it's surprisingly resilient, but you really don't want to be around when it all comes crashing down. When the US and China slap tariffs on each other's goods, it disrupts global supply chains, increases uncertainty, and makes businesses less likely to invest and hire. It's like throwing a wrench into the gears of the global economic engine. Sure, it might keep chugging along for a while, but eventually, something's going to break. This economic slowdown can lead to lower growth, reduced trade, and even recessions in some countries. It's a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, economic isolationism is about as effective as trying to cure a headache by banging your head against a wall. It might feel good in the moment, but the long-term consequences are rarely worth it. So the next time you hear someone advocating for a trade war, remind them that the global economy is not a zero-sum game. There are no real winners in a trade war, only varying degrees of losers. So, there you have it, the top 10 pros and cons of the US-China trade war. As we've seen, it's a complex issue with no easy answers. There are winners and losers on both sides, and the long-term consequences are still unfolding. But one thing is clear, this trade war is a symptom of a much larger problem, one that goes beyond tariffs and trade deficits. It's about the shifting balance of power in the world, the challenges of globalization, and the fundamental question of how nations should interact with each other in the 21st century. These are big, complicated issues, and frankly, I don't have all the answers. But I do know that resorting to protectionism and economic isolationism is a bit like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It might seem like a good idea at the time, but it's going to cause more problems in the long run. So, what do you think? Is this trade war good or bad? Are there any pros and cons we missed? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis of the issues that matter.